I'm Mindy Peterson, and this is Enhanced Life with Music, where we explore the ways music can make our lives better and spotlight the resources you can use to enhance your life with music. We're talking today about a form of music therapy that has been uniquely successful in healing and empowering traumatized voices, including those of child soldiers and those impacted by sexual violence. Darcy Ataman is a music and video producer by trade and has dedicated his work to bringing an alternate form of music therapy to survivors of conflict and trauma. He is the founder of Make Music Matter and developer of the innovative program Healing in Harmony, which has served over 14,000 individuals in 9 countries around the world. Darcy writes and speaks internationally on the long-lasting impact of music and its ability to, I love this, restitch the soul. Thank you so much for joining me today, Darcy, and welcome to Enhance Life with Music.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, Darcy, starting out, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your journey. What took you from being an undergrad at University of Manitoba to developing a music therapy program for survivors of violence? Can you tell us a little bit about your path?
Sure. And there are various versions of the story, which can go from 2 minutes to 2 hours. So
We'll take the
I'll try,
2-minute version.
I'll try the expeditious version of it. Basically, I did do my undergrad in psychology and didn't realize until fairly recently I put my two worlds together. Honestly, that it had escaped me. But even when I was an undergrad, my primary interest was music and art. But I went to school because, frankly, it was easier than getting a job at that point. So I just kind of kept going to school. So it gave me more time to do music. And that then led me into wanting to become a music producer. And I ended up in Philadelphia, actually. And because I had cold called in the Eastern Seaboard for a long time, I spent a tremendous amount of time in New York, just literally knocking on doors saying, I'll volunteer at a studio. If I'll take out the garbage, just let me watch. And eventually I got to a studio in Philadelphia that allowed me to do that. And it ended up being really important to this part of the journey and the story because the person working at the studio is a gentleman named Shelley Yakis, who's a famous engineer, recorded Imagine from John Lennon and a bunch of U2 records, Alice Cooper, Fleetwood Mac, you name it. And I ended up living with him. And across the hall was DJ Jazzy Jeff. So it was a really incredible musical environment to be in.
Wow.
And I was in that environment 24/7 pretty much for a while. But what occurred, which is part of this journey, was not only I ended up being sort of the guru to the vocalists in that area about doing better performances in the studio. My nickname, actually, I've never told this to anybody. It was, honestly, I haven't, was Yoda, because I would just go talk to a singer to make him or her better, and then they'd perform fine.
Oh, wow.
So my nickname ended up being Yoda for a while. But what occurred during that time of practically living in these studios was, it was just the advent of the internet where you had to dial up the one office computer that had internet. And I'd take breaks and go online just to kind of clear my head. And I discovered these outside news sources like the BBC and Al Jazeera. And being from Canada and the prairies, I just never saw this before.
Mm.
I was reading about the AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa in 2006, 2007, and I was just floored at it and just wondering why this wasn't in the daily news at home in Winnipeg. And I got really, the more I dug into it, I got really obsessed about the injustice gap of what is and what should be.
Mm.
So I got really interested in that. And I started to do, as a producer, these one-off projects. And for the first few years, I always would tell friends, okay, I'm going to take this year, do some good in the world, and go back to my quote unquote regular real life.
Uh-huh.
And it just never occurred.
Huh.
It never happened. The deeper you get into this work, the more impact that you might have. It's just harder to go back to a regular life. I liken it to the movie The Matrix, when you take the red pill, the blue pill, and sort of once you make that delineation, it's really hard to go back. And then also to finish that is once you start going overseas to the field, like once I started traveling to Africa and realizing the issues that they're grappling with are all almost directly tied to us here.
Hmm.
So if someone is suffering somewhere else in the world, it's usually because someone else is benefiting.
Mm.
Once I started to see and feel that and realizing how my daily life in Canada is actually quite adversely affecting someone else in, say, Eastern Africa, it really changes you forever. And that was, without the specifics, the catalyst on making it my life's work.
Wow. Well, I know you have some pretty dramatic experiences of being
Mhm.
in the field, being thrown into prison, threatened with
Yeah.
execution. I mean, you've had some
Yeah.
really harrowing experiences, and it really speaks to your commitment to really making the world a better place and just the purpose that you feel in the work that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about Healing and Harmony's music therapy model that you developed. How is it different from other music therapy?
Yeah, and it's interesting development because I really ended up sort of taking my life as a studio producer and bringing it to international development. So the traditional model of in recording back in the day in the studio was a producer and engineer. And this is what we did, it was just producer and psychologist. So whereas traditional music therapy, and I'm not knocking another intervention or medium whatsoever, it does work to help heal one's trauma. Healing and harmony goes a lot further in my, well, I want to say my opinion, but we have peer-reviewed medical research that shows this. So it goes a lot deeper in the sense that it's not only healing very severe trauma, the PTSD, anxiety, and depression. It's also helping to regain agency back to the people that are utilizing it and that are healed from it. So that's another very important part is that you can go to therapy and get healed from your past trauma and your issues, and that's wonderful. But if regaining one's agency is not baked into the model, it's sort of not pointless, but you're not having rubber meets the road. So you want to heal somebody and make sure that they again have their agency and to actually make better life choices in the future. That's when you see community wide real changes.
So kind of like
And the
that
fact,
metaphor of if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for the rest of his life.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And he might also teach his friends how to fish at the same time.
Yeah.
So, it can go even further. And then the other piece to this, what traditional music therapy doesn't do, is that our output is brand new songs. So they're not performing someone else's songs or a rhythm. Part of their healing journey is they're actually writing and recording full albums in the field. And then that goes out to the world. We have a label deal with Warner in Canada, and so all that music are huge tools of advocacy for the planet. So people can hear their stories without going through the prism of a journalist. No offense to journalists, but it's really impactful to have people's stories again directly to the planet. And I think we have at least 50 albums out already. So that's a lot of music and a lot of stories that are getting out that people normally would never hear.
And we, as listeners of this podcast, we can hear those and access those where? Spotify?
Every platform that music exists on now,
Okay.
it's on there. So Spotify and iTunes and Apple and Deezer and Tidal and YouTube, you name it, it is on there.
And how are those found? What do we search for?
Oh, just go to makemusicmatter.org
Okay.
and click music, and then you'll see all the links for every album and every medium that you want that's
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And sorry, with that, we worked really hard. It's taken years, but all of the we don't call them participants, we call them artists. So all the artists in our program, they own the rights to their music.
Mm.
Even if they're stateless, so a lot of people that we serve are essentially tragically too poor to exist on paper. Like they don't have any way that we would recognize in the Western world. There's no social insurance number, there's no bank account, there's nothing. There's not even an address that you'd recognize.
Okay.
We developed ways where they can own the intellectual property of their music and get the royalties for it at the same time.
Oh, wow.
So that's really, I think, impactful as a symbol as well.
Yeah. Explain a little bit more about some of the populations that are served by Healing and Harmony. I know we talked about child soldiers,
Mhm.
survivors of sexual violence. You alluded to HIV, AIDS,
Mhm.
survivors, poverty. What are some of the other main populations that are served?
Yeah, well, 2 off the top of my head, and we have proven with our research that the provenance of the trauma doesn't matter. So, it doesn't matter if it's a ex-child soldier or a survivor of sexual violence, the effectiveness of Healing and Harmony is the same. So that's I think that's important to mention. But we work a lot in Eastern Congo. We're very blessed to partner with his name's Dr. Mukwege, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for sexual violence. He's our main partner there.
And he helped
Um,
develop Healing and Harmony, right?
yes,
Okay. The
yes,
two of you
yeah,
together.
yeah, and he's the most honest. Like I've been lucky to meet a lot of impressive people on the planet. Um, he is the most special human I've ever by far. And I've met a lot of world leaders. He is in a class all to himself, just as a human being and his intelligence and humanity and humility. It's just unbelievable. But we work a lot there in Eastern Congo, and sadly, it's a lot of survivors of sexual violence because of the conflict mineral trade. To go off on a very quick tangent, so Eastern Congo is very rich with minerals, in particular, all the minerals that are in our technology. So the computers we're talking on right now,
Okay.
have minerals have that come from that area. And most of it is mined by tragically women that are violated, daily and by kids that are enslaved. And they do that because it's cheaper than wasting a bullet. So, that's really what it comes down to. It's cheaper and more effective. So we work with lost survivors of sexual violence in that regard, and they're sometimes the kids born of the incident. And then another area that's scaling for us right now is in Turkey and Syria. So even though that conflict is slowing down a bit finally, you still have a lot of refugees that are pouring in from Syria over the border to Turkey. So there's a border town called Gaziantep that we work in a lot. And in those particular young children, they have the trauma of the war, and they have the trauma and the stigma of being a refugee because they're not always welcome in these neighborhoods because quite honestly, Turkey has their own problems as well, and the neighborhood's overpopulated already. So understandably, tens of thousands of refugees pouring in all the time, causes more tension. So they have that stigma and shame, and sometimes they're physically targeted, and they have the physical injuries of the war as well.
Mm.
A lot of them that have accessibility issues, wheelchairs, and things like that. So they have a lot of strikes against them in life, but it's remarkable what the program does.
And as you mentioned, the program has been clinically proven to
Mhm.
help reduce depression, anxiety, PTSD in participants. I know breaking stigma and reintegration into their community is also a big focus of the program. Tell us a little bit more about how and why Healing and Harmony works and what the process looks like.
Yeah, the process, even though our results are clinically, they're very good, they're very impressive, and we've been able to test up to 6 months post program, and the results have stuck, which is really important because, especially in these areas that still have active conflict, on a daily basis, it's easy to go to your therapy, get healed, and then a week later, you're back to where you started. We've been able to prove the Healing and Harmony 6 months after the level of healing is still the same, which is, benefit to the person in the community. But we do it in a really fun way, is the truth.
Hmm.
We build little recording studios wherever we operate. And usually it's me, quite frankly, that's flying and building these places. And sometimes they're in a hospital, like in Eastern Congo. Sometimes we have mobile units in a Land Cruiser with solar panels on top of a Jeep driving through village.
Okay.
We park somewhere and bring out the equipment and record and go on that way. So when the artists or participants come into the program, they're, they don't necessarily come in thinking I'm here for my therapy appointment, which has a lot of stigma still.
Mm,
Stigma here, never mind in those areas. And especially, for example, if you're a young lady, and I feel awful as a man talking about this, so forgive me, but if you're a young lady who's a survivor of sexual violence, the amount of stigma and shame on you and your community is tremendous. So the program is actually really good because they're not identified as that person going to the doctor for that reason. It's, oh, she's going to this really cool studio and recording. She's a singer.
yeah,
It kind of wipes that out.
yeah.
And then while it's happening, we can give them their therapy. So
Well, I've gotta
it's
believe too that just because it is more of a fun process, you use the word fun, there's gotta
mhm,
be just a little bit of escapism or just something that just kinda
yeah,
lightens the mood a little bit and provides kinda like a portal into their psyche where they can just
yeah.
access some of those feelings, and I'm maybe skipping ahead here, but in the process of writing a song, you don't have to get into graphic details about what you experience. You can use allegory and kind of allude to things without really reliving them explicitly. So again, I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I can see how just having a little bit of lightening to life is so desperately needed and probably really helpful in this process.
Well, that's exactly it. It's kind of twofold. So it's what you said, yet at the same time, that writing and recording process is a safe way to extract the trauma and articulate it to the surface.
Mm.
So again, sadly, everyone that we've worked with, and actually, I think our numbers have changed. I think we're up to about 18,000 now.
Ah,
They all have a story that would be a Netflix series that you would never believe because it's too outlandish.
wow.
Honestly, every single one of them has a story that would just it's unbelievable in a tragic way.
Wow.
So for them to talk about the incident at first actually re-traumatizes,
Mm.
which of course you don't want to do. But the musical process and the lyric writing process and the use of allegory and metaphor actually again is a safe way of doing it. It's been also clinically proven to access parts of the brain that are shut off in a normal sort of talking, conversing way. So usually first song someone writes is the first time they've talked about the incident.
Ah,
And then once they talk about it, the psychologist is in the room and we can set a treatment pathway for it.
mm,
Because like, oh, okay, now we know what it is.
mm,
So it's a fun and safe way to bring up those issues to the surface and then we can treat it basically.
mm. And I just want to kind of interject here too. I think you work with the people who have actually experienced violence and also their caregivers as well sometimes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it depends on the context where we're working. But for example, yes, in Turkey, a lot of times also since it's young children, we're also working with their caregivers.
Okay.
And it's twofold. One, it's so the caregiver can understand the person that it could be their child, but can understand them better, and then it's acceptable way for them to converse. Um, Two, it's fatigue for the caregiver as well.
Uh,
If you're always being the caretaker for something that's so again just so extreme and so awful, that wears you down just as much, and you get your own trauma.
well,
So
most of them probably aren't trained for recognizing this or knowing what to
yeah,
do with it. So if they can work with somebody who is, what a relief that must
yeah,
be. Yeah,
yeah.
just get a
So
little guidance and direction.
mhm.
Staying balanced in life is very important to me. Balance in work and play, activity and rest, and balance in fueling my energy. When I am on the go or just find my cupboards running a little bare, the fuel I reach for is Jam Bar energy bars. These bars are certified organic whole food bars. They're non GMO and gluten free. I especially love that they are higher in protein than the other all natural bars I found, and they're minimally sweetened with only all natural sweeteners. Well, I love all five flavors. My personal favorites are musical mango and tropical trio. Jambar flavor names reflect the company founder's passion for music. And Jambar donates a whopping 50% of net profits to programs that support music and active living. Join me in supporting a balanced life and world by reaching for jam bars. Available at Amazon, select retailers, and jambar.com. Links are in the show notes. So, participants come into the studio, whatever that studio may look like. They work with a trained counselor and trained musician to come up with a song, lyrics, melody. What does that look like?
Yeah, so they're in the studio environment, and all of our operational staff are local and indigenous to the area. So
Okay. And I
yeah,
think that's a big part of your strategy, right? Local.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. For a
And
couple of
explain why that's so important.
well, one, it's a lot more effective, and, for example, in Eastern Congo, you can drive 45 minutes to a different village, and there's a different dialect spoken, and, we're not gonna know it, right?
Wow. Yeah.
There's hundreds of them literally in these little in a swath of land, so we're not gonna know it, and also there's this subtle artistic nuances as well that, "Oh, they like the kick drum over here. It's a little off for us, but they just love that." Okay,
Oh, okay.
we're not gonna know that unless it's, you're a local person,
Okay.
and also then the model gets delivered a lot better because they understand the community, the trust is there. That's
Mm,
very important, is the trust. And then, frankly, no one needs someone flying in and taking a job away in these communities either. That's
mm,
sort of
sure.
the last, piece to that.
Sure. Well, I've got to believe too that just having that local influence has really got to go a long way in terms of reintegrating people and building that sense of belonging and community and feeling like I'm not isolated, I'm not in this alone. There's this community behind me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, especially if you're a survivor of almost any type of trauma, intellectually, you might know you're not the only person in the world that's gone through it, but you feel like you are.
Mhm.
And I have been in the studio in these areas countless times and have witnessed somebody. That's why we do it in groups as well. So they bond as a group. And, one young person might articulate his or her experience through a song, and then the neighbor will turn to them and say, "That happened to you? That happened to me." And even though statistically, sadly, that it's happened to lots of people in that area, and they know that, it doesn't feel that way. So for it to take away that isolation piece is huge as well.
Yeah. I think Healing in Harmony also does quite a bit with promoting leadership within the group, within the participants, and then also aftercare monitoring and follow-up, which is also really critical to have the local population involved in this and may be different than other more traditional forms of music therapy. You talk a little bit about those factors of healing and harmony.
Yeah, we're very if you're a person that spends any significant time in the field, like I do and have done over the years, your ego should eviscerate almost instantly. Like it just doesn't, you don't want to be in an organization that just gets up like the numbers of we've served X number of people. You want to make sure everyone you've touched has sustainable change to his or her life.
Mm,
Right. Like, again, especially if you spend time in the field, all the stuff about ego goes right out the door very quickly. So we're very serious on, okay, our results are great, but how do we make sure that actually extrapolates out sustainably to a community so they're healthy? Which takes a lot more work, and effort because also a lot of these communities are fairly transient because of the economics of it, right? So it's not somebody has a home address and they're there for their lifetime.
mm,
They're subsistence farmers for the most part, and that's very transient. That's why we don't play favorites, but in each group, natural leaders do kind of emerge. And then we encourage that because then they're part of the aftercare. Those leaders do a couple of things which honestly happened naturally, and then we codified it. They did two things. They started to rally their groups together after the program was done so they can keep performing the songs. And then we notice if they keep doing that, their healing still stays.
mm.
And then they were ended up being sort of natural advertisements. we didn't this happened countless times. They would start walking to other villages and saying, "Hey, you guys need this program too. It's
Mm,
amazing." And that's not something we asked them to do. It just, again, happened quite naturally, and then we kinda built it into our model.
uh-huh. Wow.
Mm,
So, creation of the music is definitely a big piece of this.
yeah.
But advocating is a big piece of this too. The artists, the participants become advocates, and their music, their tangible product that they've created is disseminated throughout the world, really. Not just through the live performances that they're able to do locally, but with radio, streaming
Mhm.
platforms, social media. So I've gotta believe that that is really healing for them too, feeling like they're not just healing themselves, but they're making a difference. They're increasing awareness, they're helping to reduce stigma around whatever it is that they suffered, and sorta like that feeling of self-efficacy, like, I can have purpose in making a difference for other people. But speak a little bit about that piece of it.
Yeah, well, I'll give, 2 quick anecdotes that just came to mind that I quite like that really speak to that. Again, in these areas, even in indigenous communities in Canada that we work in as well, what you see is, at least internally, the loss of power. The paradigm of power has shifted. If you're in an active conflict zone or a war zone, you've had everything taken away from you. And you feel like you have, again, no power in your life whatsoever. But the advocacy through the songs actually helps to shift that. And it seems almost silly to say it, but it's actually true. So, two quick examples. Again, Eastern Congo, as a handful of years ago, there was one group that wrote this song called The Criminal Father. And it translates to basically all the men in the community that either allow the rapes to continue or do them themselves, or whatever the case is in the government that allows the impunity of it. And this song became a little of a local hit on the radio in the morning in this area called Bukavu. And so the morning drive, so to speak, they'd play the song. And I was there for it. And the military started to call in to complain. They did. It is absolutely true to say, no, 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 we're the good guys. We don't do that anymore. We're not committing the rapes. And it's an absolute lie.
Oh,
But it's just fascinating that someone with the bullets is scared with somebody with the songs, like enough that they actually would call in because again, I
yeah.
firsthand. And then once we told that to the women who wrote this song, like, they literally were laughing. And
Yes.
because it's like, oh my, like, but again, it instills the notion of the definition of what power could mean.
Yeah,
And now they had
wow.
a new definition of it, which again helps their healing and their agency. And I've seen that countless times. I've seen, you know, um, husbands literally call the wife that they kicked out of the home because she was violated, no fault of her own, of course, say, "Hey, I think I was wrong. Can you come back home?"
Oh.
And sometimes the women have said, "Nah, I'm good." You know, and that's huge. And I've seen, tragically, women who have had babies born of the rape start to take care of their child for the first time ever from it. So you have a lot of real sustainable change. And even in Canada, I won't get too specific here, but one of our sites with indigenous population, there was a song about how the oil companies are decimating their natural environment that they grew up in. And for these young people to write something that powerful was a big step, to the point where, this, again, I got to be very vague on purpose because he's a lovely person. A federal politician would not complain, but kept bringing up this. Oh, I love the album. Oh, but the song about the oil, because his constituency votes, how he gets his votes is from that.
Mm.
So
Oh,
it was kind of fascinating how this person would bring this up to me multiple times.
yeah.
And again, it just goes to show, like, oh, there's a power there that's untapped.
Yeah. Well, it is amazing. I mean, we tend to feel like politicians have so much power in our world, and they do. I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not diminishing that, but we can tend to undervalue the power that is in us with our communities, with community action, grassroots efforts, with media, TV, music, culture. All of those things can also really move the needle. And you're just an amazing example of what what one person can do. Now, I know you do work a lot with partnerships. I
Mhm.
know you said that you travel a lot. Tell us a little bit about the partnerships, the therapists you work with, the researchers, the humanitarian professionals. I know you work with a lot of NGOs. Like, what kind of partnerships make all of this possible?
Yeah, we work with, I mean, we are an NGO ourselves,
Okay.
and we have our core staff. But depending on the project site, there's partnerships in order to do it properly. So we sometimes will partner with very large NGOs like a World Vision, to be part of a larger grant opportunity. But more specifically, we partner all the time with local groups, local community groups on the ground, because you need them to implement this stuff properly. They have the relationships. They know, like, okay, we need to talk to the chief. He's in this little village. If we get his buy-in, he'll let you talk to the local health administrator, and then we're allowed to legally hire people. Like, you need all
Yeah.
the logistical stuff.
Yeah.
And the only way you do that is local partnerships, and the only way you can do that is to be there. Like,
Okay.
there's no way. I've yet to find it's why I spend so much time in the field, in order to build these relationships that are gonna last through the hard times, because there will be hard times,
Yeah.
is you need the local buy-in, and you
Sure.
have to be there to build it. You will not get the trust if you don't show up to somebody's home, so to speak.
Yeah.
You just can't do it over email or whatever the case is.
Well, classic example of it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth in that. If listeners are listening to this and think, I would like to get involved
Mhm.
in what is happening here, what are some ways that people can get involved, whether it's through partnerships or other opportunities?
Yeah, we're always looking for, obviously, new communities we can work in that'll allow us. We never force ourselves anywhere. The community has to want you there. So if there's, people out there that have ins with these local community-based organizations somewhere that has a need, and of course, like any other charity NGO, we're always fundraising every day. That's just how it goes. So people can go to makemusicmatter.org, and if they're from Canada, they can click donate, get instant tax receipt, or on the website, there's also Make Music Matter USA, and they can do the same.
Registered nonprofit here in the
Yeah,
US. Yeah.
yeah,
So donating, I think you have a spot too on your website where you can get more information on volunteering, right?
yes, yeah,
Okay. To
yeah.
volunteer, partnerships. There's a newsletter. You can sign up on the homepage. Just
Oh,
scroll
please.
down to the bottom and put your email address in there. You can stay in touch through social media and kind of stay informed on what you're doing and what needs are, what accomplishments are, and exciting things are happening to celebrate. So lots of really great information on your website. I can vouch for that when I
Thank
was
you.
looking through that. Lots of great information there.
And
Um,
even just checking out the music,
yeah.
going to the website, going through the links. There's a lot of music out there, and enjoy it.
Well, it's so inspiring to hear what you're doing to make the world a better place. I mean, it can be so easy for us in westernized culture, developed worlds to get very comfortable in the bubble
Mhm.
that we're living in. And so it's inspiring to hear what you're doing just through reading some news articles and thinking, why am I not hearing this in my news? And what can I do about it? So, really admire that, appreciate that. I want to close with a quote of yours from your website that really resonated with me. You said, when people are deprived of justice, they create their own language of hope and healing. The best way to express this is through art and music. Wholeheartedly agree with that. Love that. Any last words you want to share with listeners before we close out with a coda?
When we're talking about just wanting to know what's going on in the world in a broader sense, and knowing these stories, um, there is a really strategic importance to this, is that, as cliche as it sounds, the world is shrinking daily because of technology. So the highest penetration rate of cell phones in the world is Africa. So even in the poorest areas in Africa, or where the most active conflict zones, you have these pay-as-you-go cell phones.
Huh.
And that's happening everywhere. And because of that, there's a huge, again, I've noticed a massive difference in the last number of years. Whereas before, there was a bit of a separation in a bubble. So you could kind of do the work. I would come home and there'd be, again, a separation of it and a bit of an ignorance to it. But because of the technology en masse, people in those areas now understand their part in the equation of the world. They know, for example, my 8-year-old's literally a slave in a mine breaking rocks, which I've seen personally, so you can have your latest iPhone, which I admit I have one as well. And that is an absolute truth. And because of that is happening upon the millions and millions now, there's a growing resentment and anger. Understandably, that's how terrorism is going up. Before, if you were a humanitarian worker in the field, you're almost untouchable. Like no one would do anything. But that is absolutely gone now because of these issues. Because these, again, the most struggling parts of the world and now understand it. And they know they're suffering because of someone else's benefiting. And that's going to cause the world massive problems coming very quickly. So I think it's a lot easier to keep friends than to have to defend yourself against an enemy later on.
Mm. Yeah, and so important for us to connect the dots of
Mhm.
how our purchases and our lifestyle and our actions are impacting people across the globe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I ask all my guests to close out our conversation with a coda. Do you have a song or story you can close us out with about a
Well,
moment that music enhanced your life?
well, I have countless amazing I've been to this concert sort of stories on a personal level. But if you want to bring it back to the work, and it is music related, one of the really impactful ones that just stuck with me from a few years ago was our work in Uganda, and we're working in a little village there, and there was a group of about, I think it was either 14 or 16 ladies that wrote to me, and they said they were all former sex slaves of the Lord's Resistance Army, so it's a rebel group in that part of northern Uganda, and they had escaped, and they were planning to commit mass suicide because they thought, what's the point? We're going to get captured again at some point soon. What's the point of even living? And we don't want to go back to that life. And um, yeah, I'm a hit at dinner parties, but sorry. So they wrote to me to say that was their plan, and then they went through the program and they healed and got their agency back. And they wrote to me to say we decided not to go through with it because of it.
Wow.
And and the reason why I say that is not because, oh, look of our great work. That's not the point of it. The point of it is we think of music as kind of innocuous a lot of times, and that's just not true. I mean, that is look at that power, so that's why I want to tell listeners, because no, music can actually delineate life and death in these areas.
Thank you so much to Darcy for sharing those powerful stories of the power of music and for all he does to enhance lives with music around the globe. If you found this conversation as impactful as I did, definitely check out the show notes for ways to connect with Darcy's work and make music matter. As always, there's lots of links there. You'll find a transcript of this conversation as well, and links to related episodes, including Bridging Divides with Musicians Without Borders, Beyond Me Too, and Transcending Conflict with the Jerusalem Youth Chorus. All Enhanced Life with Music episodes are evergreen, so check out the back catalog for more ways that music can make your and your community's life better. If there's a topic or guest that you would like to hear featured on this show, or if you have a question for me that you'd like to hear answered on the show, please let me know. You can always connect with me on email, mindy@mpetersonmusic.com, Facebook, Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing the show. Until next time, may your life be enhanced with music.